Well, folks, welcome back to our last lecture here in week number 6 of GB102, Bible Backgrounds. In this lecture, we're going to be covering an area of the Levant known as the Lower Jordan Valley. Now, as we discussed earlier in the semester, the Great Rift is a very large crack that runs through this area of the world, and at the bottom of this crack in the Earth's crust, there's a river valley, the Jordan River Valley. And so today we're going to look at this lower Jordan Valley. We're also going to look at the sea that it flows into, the Dead Sea, and then we're going to look at a dry area that continues further south from this Dead Sea called the Wadi Aravah. And so altogether this will all constitute Israel's Great Rift. And again, I can't stress enough that this entire area of the world is a barrier. If you're traveling east to west, the hardest thing to cross is the Great Rift. And whether you're crossing the Jordan River, whether you're crossing the Dead Sea, or even whether you're crossing the dry and arid Wadi Aravah, there are many challenges to traveling through this area of the world. So, if you guys are ready, let's hit the trail and let's see what we can find. So let's begin by discussing the Lower Jordan Valley. Now, the reason we call this the Lower Jordan Valley is because there's also an Upper Jordan Valley. The Lower Jordan Valley emerges out of the Sea of Galilee and runs southward through the Great Rift until it reaches the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point in the Great Rift system. Now, in contrast, the Upper Jordan Valley flows into the Sea of Galilee, and it originally starts in a place called Lake Hula and flows south into the Sea of Galilee. And so that's the Upper Jordan Valley, but for today we're just going to focus on the Lower Jordan Valley. And my initial statement for this area is that the Lower Jordan Valley is a place that when you cross it, something spectacular is usually happening, especially during the Old Testament times when we don't have access to bridges, we don't have access to easy transportation across this water system. And probably the most famous of these crossings is in Joshua chapter 3. The priests are going to take the Ark of the Covenant, they are going to wade into this water, and it's also when the water is at flood stage, so when it's at its highest. And the moment they touch the waters part, that it backs up upstream, and the people of Israel are able to cross over on dry ground. And so in many ways, crossing the Jordan River, especially crossing it in a miraculous way, will be one of the major signs that happens throughout the history of Israel that something special is happening. Okay, so to get a better look at it, let's zoom into this large red area here on our map. Do you see it? That area marked there in red, going all the way from the Sea of Galilee all the way south down to the Dead Sea, is the Lower Jordan Valley. Now, again, this place will play a important role in both the Old and the New Testament. Jesus will be baptized here. Elijah will cross here just before he's taken up into heaven. And so, in many ways, the Lower Jordan Valley, even though it is not a focal point for Israelite settlements, it is a focal point for Israelite theology. Okay, and so there we are zoomed in. You see that large blue section up at the top? That's the Sea of Galilee. The blue section down at the bottom, that's the Dead Sea. And you notice in the middle, the ground is also in this kind of bluish purplish tint. And that is to suggest that the elevations here are at sea level or even below sea level, that this crack in the Earth's crust is actually so deep and so profound that we start to get measurements hundreds of feet, if not thousands of feet, below sea level when we start to analyze this area. So now that we've got this kind of area homed in on, let's go to our map and let's figure out the cardinal points and directions around this area. Okay, so there we go. To the west of the Lower Jordan Valley, as you're climbing up and out of the Great Rift, you'll eventually get to either the lands of Samaria, the Saddle of Benjamin, or the land of Judah. So just keep in mind that this Lower Jordan Valley is a large area, and that if you go out of it in the north, you'll be in Samaria. If you go out of it in the south, you'll be in Judah. If you go out of it somewhere near the middle, you'll be going into the land of Benjamin. Now, the northern terminus for this area is the Sea of Galilee, and that's a pretty stable feature there. Now, to the east, again, we have two large land masses. We have Gilead in the north, and sometimes people even consider Bashan, even further to the north, as lying to the east of the lower Jordan Valley. And there on the southern end of it, we have the land of Ammon, which we've already looked at. And then finally, the southern terminus of the lower Jordan Valley is the Dead Sea. Now, the Great Rift itself has really three parts that if we were to kind of cut a lateral cross section, we would notice that it forms kind of a stair step or V kind of pattern that keeps going down until we get to the very, very bottom of this large valley. And so the first section of this Great Rift is known as the El Gore. And of course, this is not to be confused with a former vice president, Al Gore. But the El Gore is a very steep area of the Great Rift that forms the sides of the Great Rift Valley. And in some places, like the cliffs of Arbela, that we're really dealing with, you know, a cliff of several hundred feet as we drop off into the Great Rift. Now, because this El Gore is so steep, it makes travel in and out of the Great Rift Valley very difficult, often requiring a monumental effort or at least time to find a road that takes a more shallow way out of the rift itself. Now, once you've navigated the cliffs of the El Gore, eventually you get to the bottom of the valley. This is the floodplain of the Jordan River, and this whole part of the valley is known as the Katara. It's relatively flat, and frequently marshes and ponds can form so long as there is a waterway coming through this. However, the Katara is frequently a very dry place if there isn't a waterway going through there. Simply put, the mountains that are to the west of the Great Rift form a rain shadow. The rain clouds will hit the lands of Samaria and Judah, but then they will exhaust their supply of rain. And so the areas of the Great Rift, and especially the Katara, are very dry. And so the only real water that comes through this area is found in the riverbeds that are flowing from the areas that get perennial rain. Now, at the bottom of the Great Rift Valley, we have a place called the Zor. And the Zor is the deep channel that's been cut out by the Jordan River. And all other major rivers in the north of Israel, if they flow down towards the Great Rift, they will end up in the Jordan River. That the Jordan River is kind of the drain of this part of the world, and even that's what the name of the Jordan means. It means the downflowing or downgoing river. And so as all of these other smaller wadis, like the Wadi Herod, the Wadi Farah, the Wadi Yarmouk, the Wadi Yavok, all of these rivers are going to flow into the Jordan River, and as that happens, the Jordan River is going to cut a very deep trench into the floor of the Katara, and this deep trench is known as the Zor. So, we're 6 weeks in, and I'm pretty sure you know what's going to happen now. Go ahead and download your thumbnail maps for the lower Jordan Valley, and we'll play the song.
If there's a place you gotta go, I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map.
Map. Just remember, 3 more weeks and we'll only have to hear you again in reruns. Okay, so here we go. Here's our map of the lower Jordan Valley. And let's go ahead and get our blue pens out for starters, and let's mark the bodies of water. The first big body of water you're going to want to get is there at the northern end, and it's that kind of heart or harp-shaped lake known as the Sea of Galilee, and it's up there at the top of the map. So go ahead and pause the video here and mark that in blue as we have shown here. Next, at the bottom of the map, we have the Dead Sea, and this will be the, if the Jordan River is the drain of this whole area, the Dead Sea is the lowest place where that drain will empty out into. So, once again, pause the map and mark the Dead Sea as we have shown. And now, at this juncture, we need to connect the dots. So you're going to want to take your blue pen, and you're going to want to have the Jordan River coming out of the Sea of Galilee and flowing down, 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 down to the Jordan, down to the Dead Sea, and they will connect these two bodies of water. So we have the freshwater Sea of Galilee, the freshwater Jordan River, but then the saltwater Dead Sea there at the bottom of the map. Alright, now here's the part where we connect the dots with all of these other lectures we've done so far. You remember the Wadi Harod from the Jezreel Valley map? You remember the Wadi Farah from the Samaria map? You remember the Wadi Yavok from the Amun map? Well, we're going to add all three of those, and you notice that they're going to come into the map from the highland areas that get a lot of rain, and they're going to dump all of their water into the Jordan River. Now, on top of that, we're going to add one more river. This is a river that we will see in the Gilead and Bashan lectures. This is known as the Wadi Yarmouk, and it's not to be confused with the Wadi Yarkon that we saw all the way back at the beginning of the class when we looked at the Philistine plain. Alright, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and mark our cities. Now, I will say kind of for the record, there's not that many cities considering how huge this area is. And most of the cities, just like the city of Megiddo, are going to serve as toll roads. Anyone coming in and out of the Great Rift is going to have to pass one of these cities if they're going to, get in and out in an easy way. And so places like Bet-Shan, places like Sukkot, places like Penuel, places like Jericho will all serve as major kind of toll bridges, or I should say toll plazas, for east-west travel. If anyone crosses the Jordan River and crosses the Great Rift, they're going to have to come by these major fortified cities. And so controlling these cities will be a major strategical point of advantage for many people, both the Israelites and later people such as the Romans or such as the Canaanites. Okay, so now that we've got that map all marked up, let's look at the points that I would like you to remember about the Lower Jordan Valley. And the first thing you need to know about the Lower Jordan Valley is that it's a border and a barrier. And I probably can't stress this enough. The Jordan River, because it lies at the bottom of a very deep trench, basically a large gash in the center of the world, it is a barrier to east-west travel in the Levant. And during the biblical era, there's no bridges. So if you want to get cargo, if you want to get supplies, if you want to get an army down the El Gore, you're going to have a hassle. You want to get an army or supplies across the Katara, you're going to have to deal with the fact that there's just not a lot of water, and so you're going to have to hug a river. You got to deal with the fact once you get to the Zor, you've got to cross a major river, that's the Jordan River, and then once you've done all that, you've then got to go back up the other side. And so getting through the Lower Jordan Valley is a hassle and a half. Now, in general, most people will cross the Jordan River by wading. You basically find a shallow place and you walk across. And of course, this poses all kinds of trouble if you have pack animals or carts that you're trying to cross. Now, several times in Scripture, though, God will help this process by either splitting the river or having some kind of a divine miracle happen which allows the people to cross quickly. And our next point that I would like to point out about the Lower Jordan Valley is that it is low and dry. And I just would like you to call attention to the picture that's here on the slide. You notice we have all that pretty blue water there that's snaking its way down at the base of the Katara. That's the Jordan River. But you notice all the fields and everything beside it, there's just kind of a brown, dusty quality to it. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use the Jordan River to irrigate this area, and it will be widely irrigated today. But during biblical times, there really isn't much you can do with this fast-flowing and greatly sloping river. In fact, this river cuts such a wide swath through the valley that when it leaves the Sea of Galilee, it's already about 500 feet below sea level. Once it gets to the Dead Sea, it's going to be about 1,300 feet below sea level. And that's just a long way down, especially when you consider that the lowest place in the United States is, places like Death Valley, and they're only 86 feet below sea level. And our final point to remember is that the lower Jordan Valley is home to very few settlements. There are a couple major cities like Bet-Shan and Jericho, but for the most part, the cities in the lower Jordan Valley are going to suffer because they sit right in the middle of a rain shadow. And because there's not a lot of rain getting to these areas, they are not really all that conducive for settlements. When people do build in these areas, they will often build fortifications because they'll want to control east-west travel. But that's very different from making a settlement simply because it's a great place to build your city. And so one thing you'll notice is that most of the cities are built along major wadi or river systems. Simply put, you got to get water to these places somehow if they're even going to survive as a toll booth. And the key to that is building along a wadi. And this will also help to direct the traffic your way because just as the cities can't survive without access to water, so travelers can't survive without access to water. And so people will largely follow the roads and the wadis will follow those or the roads will follow the wadis so that people who are traveling through this area have access to water. Alrighty, so with the lower Jordan Valley behind us, let's shift gears here and let's look at our next area on the map called the Dead Sea. And you might be wondering, why is it called the Dead Sea? And the simple answer is it's a major saltwater body of water. In fact, it's much more salty than even the ocean is. And this is going to pose all kinds of problems, and we'll look at those here in a bit. But on this big map here, go ahead and identify the Dead Sea. It's that large lake-looking body of water there near the middle of the map, and it looks like it kind of has two little fingers jutting off of it, and one of those fingers is curving around. That's the Dead Sea. You see it there? Now, one of the interesting text about this area is quoted in Ezekiel 47 verses 6 through 9. Ezekiel writes this, quote, "Then he led me back to the bank of the river, and when I had returned, I noticed a vast number of trees along the banks of the river on both sides. And he said to me, these waters go out towards the eastern region and flow down into the Aravah, where they enter the Dead Sea, where the sea is stagnant and the waters will become fresh. Every living creature which swarms there in the river will live, and there will be many fish, and these waters will flow there, and it will become fresh, and everything will live where this river flows." Unquote. Now, Ezekiel is seeing a prophecy where water is flowing out of the city of Jerusalem and into the Dead Sea. And he's making a contrast that all the other rivers that flow into the Dead Sea only add to its salty content, making it saltier and saltier every year. And Ezekiel is making an interesting prophecy that when God has finished his restoration of Israel's temple, the real temple, the final temple, that even the waters flowing from it would be able to take something like the Dead Sea and turn it fresh again. Alright, so we are all zoomed in there, and again, notice the area around the Dead Sea. On this map, all of the area is this kind of dark purple. And so what we're dealing with is areas that are easily 1,000 feet below sea level, if not more, sometimes as many as 1,200 and 1,300 feet below sea level. In fact, the Dead Sea itself is so deep that it goes down even another 1,000 feet once you get into it. So it's a very colossal and very imposing feature at the base of this large crack in the Earth's crust. Alright, so let's go ahead and download our maps here, and you know what happens. The theme song gets to play.
If there's a place you gotta go, I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map.
Okay, so let's begin by looking at the cardinal points. We've got the Dead Sea here in the middle. To the west of the Dead Sea, we have the land of Judah, and that's pretty much going to be pretty stable all the way up and down. There near the south end of the Dead Sea, we also start to get into what we would call the Negev. Now, the northern border for the Dead Sea is going to be the lower Jordan Valley. Going to the east, we're going to see the land of Ammon up there on the northern end of the map, and we're going to see the land of Moab there on the southern end of the map. And then, if you continue going south past the Dead Sea, you're going to go into a very dry and desolate area known as the Wadi Aravah. Alright, so now that we've got that, let's get our blue pen out and let's mark all of the major bodies of water in the Dead Sea Basin. So the first thing, and it's obvious, is that big blue kind of finger-looking lake known as the Dead Sea. Some people say it looks like a whale, but I don't see it. But that's going to be the dominant feature of this map. And there's going to be 4 different rivers or wadis that flow into the Dead Sea. And keep in mind, all of these will flow into it. The Dead Sea has no outlet. No river comes out of the Dead Sea and goes downhill even further. And so to the north, we have the Jordan River coming into the Dead Sea. There to the east, we have the Wadi Hadain and the Wadi Arnon. And just before they get to the Dead Sea, these 2 wadis will merge and then will flow into the Dead Sea. And there to the south, we will have the Wadi Zered flowing through the city of Zor into the southern end of the Dead Sea. Now, as far as roads go, we're only going to have one major road system going through this area, and that's going to be what I'm calling the Zor Road. Now, the Zor Road gets its name because Zor is the major focal point of this, and while the map here is kind of cutting off the Zor Road, just know that it makes a wide loop around the Dead Sea and continues. And so if you go east from Zor on the Zor Road, you'll go up the Moab ascent and you'll eventually be in the land of Moab. If you go to the west, you will eventually come out of the Dead Sea Basin and into what's known as the Beersheba Corridor, or the Beersheba Depression, and that will continue all the way to the city of Beersheba. And if you keep going west, it will eventually wind up in Gaza, there at the Philistine Plain. And so go ahead, take a break here, mark the Dead Sea and all the rivers in blue, and mark the Beersheba corridor here as I have shown in purple, just to show the low area that is easy access into this basin. And then mark the road, the Zor Road, going through the Beersheba Depression, through the city of Zor, and eastward towards the land of Moab. Now, surprisingly, there's actually quite a lot of interesting cities, both biblically and extra-biblically, around the Dead Sea. There to the north, we have the city of Qumran, which is a small community that was home to a group of Jewish people known as the Essenes. And the Essenes were famous for being kind of an isolationist group. And one of the things that they left to posterity is a copy of very ancient writings known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And some of our oldest copies of the scripture come from this Qumran settlement. A little to the south, we have a city called En-Gedi. It's more of an oasis, really, but En-Gedi will serve as a hideout for David and his men while he's being pursued by Saul. A little further from that, we have a city known as Masada, and this will be a fortress that is built by King Herod the Great, and Masada will be a place where the Jewish people will make a last stand during the war against the Romans. And so you'll find this in your Josephus book, that he spends a lot of time at the end of his book on the Jewish war describing the siege at Masada. Now there to the far south of the map we have the city of Zor, and this will be a major travel point. If you're traveling east or west through the Beersheba corridor, you're going to eventually stop at Zor. Now a little bit further to the north we have a small fortification known as Machaerus, and this was also built by Herod the Great, indicating that Herod the Great had quite a lot of interest in controlling the east-west travel routes around the Dead Sea. So there you go. If you want to pause your map, pause the lecture here, you'll want to make sure that your map matches what we have here. Jordan River, Wadi Hadain, Wadi Arnon, and the Wadi Zered all flowing into the Dead Sea, and then the Zor Road going around the Dead Sea to the south, and all of the cities marked as shown. So what are the 3 take-home points that we have about the Dead Sea? Well, the first take-home point I want you to know is that the Dead Sea is the lowest place on the face of the earth. And you know, that's really all you need to say about it. It's 416 meters, or 1,300 feet below sea level. And one of the interesting things that happens when you get this far below sea level is that air pressure tends to do some funny things to you. That just as when you go up a large mountain, your ears will pop, so when you go down this deep, that your head will start to get a little bit light because the oxygen you're breathing is actually so heavy and saturating. And a lot of people will note this condition of the Dead Sea, and they will start to think that it has a lot of healing and medicinal properties. And so a lot of people will go to the Dead Sea specifically because they think that it's good or healthy for you. Now, if one look at this picture will let you know that yes, they're also going to a desert with very few oases and water sources that are fresh water. And so going to the Dead Sea will become kind of a interesting paradox, that in one sense it is a very dead and isolated area, and in another sense people will think that it is a very rejuvenating area. But our second take-home point is this, that the Dead Sea is a saltwater sea and it is devoid of life. And I can't stress this enough, you can't have things living in the Dead Sea. If you throw a fish, even a saltwater fish, into the Dead Sea, it will die. The Dead Sea has so many particles and alluvial soils running into it that it's about 30% solid matter and other particulates. And just to show how salty it is, many people will take pictures while they're swimming in the Dead Sea, and they will have their feet and their hands sticking out of the water, and they will just simply float there. The water makes almost anything extremely buoyant, but you certainly wouldn't want to swallow it. And so one of the other interesting things that's going to happen is that many companies will actually mine the shore and some of the shallow areas of the sea to get as much salt as they can, and to use that to either make beauty products. They'll use it to make fertilizers and the sort, but the sea itself cannot support life forms. And our last take-home point, we've already hinted at it because of how many fortresses are built in this area, but the Dead Sea is a well-fortified retreat. Many people throughout the Old Testament, people like David, and also people from the New Testament like Herod, will realize that this is a strategically important place. There are many caves and small little springs, and it's very easy to travel from place to place and just avoid people you don't want to meet up with. But likewise, when we get to the New Testament era, Herod has a special duty assigned to him by the Roman government. He is to keep the Persians from attacking the area of Judea that is under Roman control. And so Herod will build fortress after fortress in order to keep Persian influence out of this part of the world. Okay, folks, so you still with me? Alright, good, because we got one more to go, and what we're going to look at next is the Wadi Aravah. And this is that part of the Great Rift Valley that continues to the south of the Dead Sea. But while it is a part of the Great Rift system, keep in mind that it is not quite as shallow as the Dead Sea area. We are still going to start moving uphill from this point onward. So there we go. We got the area highlighted here. And notice that this area is huge. And also notice it's in the southern part of our map. And as we pointed out in our first week's worth of lecture, that the further south you go, the less rainfall you get. And so the Wadi Aravah is going to have kind of a double whammy when it comes to receiving rain. That any rain that does come through this area will likely dump because of rain shadow in the highlands of Judah and the Negev. And once it gets over that, you're pretty much going to get a dry, arid desert place. And so the Wadi Aravah has really only one important thing you do in it, and that is you travel through it, and hopefully you travel through it as fast as you can. Alright, so there we are. We are all zoomed into the land of the Wadi Aravah. So, you know what happens. I pause the video, you download the maps.
place you gotta go. I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map. I'm the map, I'm the map. If there's a place you gotta get, I can get you there, I bet. I'm the map. I'm the map, 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 I'm the map!
Okay, so for this map, let's go ahead and look at our cardinal points. To the west, we have the Negev, which is just the Hebrew word for the south. And so pretty much anything to the west of the Wadi Aravah is the Negev. Now, to the north, we have the Dead Sea, and that is going downhill whenever you go north in the Wadi Aravah. To the east, we have the land of Edom and Mount Seir, as it's known in the Bible. And to the south, we find the Arabian Desert, and if you keep going long enough, there at the very, very bottom, we find the Gulf of Aqaba. That's right, that one of those two fingers that formed a V around the Sinai Peninsula that we looked at in the Egypt lecture. The Gulf of Aqaba is pretty much where the Levant stops, and the Sinai Peninsula and Arabia begin. Alright, so let's take a look at our bodies of water. And the first major body of water we're going to want to note is the Dead Sea there at the top of the map. So go ahead and get out your blue pen, pause the lecture, and mark the map as we have shown. And as I hinted at a couple of seconds ago, there at the very bottom of the map is just the very tip of that finger of the Gulf of Aqaba. So go ahead and mark that one as well. And to that, we really only have one more major river to note, and that's the Wadi Zered. So there it is coming down into the Dead Sea. It's the dividing point between the land of Moab and the land of Edom. And notice that, like the Wadi Arnon, the Wadi Zered is going to form a very large rift that is very difficult for north-south travel to cross. And speaking about travel, you're going to want to get out your green pen now, because we're going to mark quite a number of roads. As I said, the biggest reason to go into the Wadi Aravah is to travel through it and to get through it as quickly as possible. So there at the southern end of the map, we have a city on the coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. This is a place known as Ezion Geber. And from Ezion Geber, we have the King's Highway is going to start snaking its way up and to the north, heading all the way to Damascus, all the way in Syria. And so the King's Highway is going to go through Ezion Geber. It's going to go through a Greek city known as Persadium. It's going to keep going further to a place called Hyumia. And it's going to then keep snaking up around north, around the Wadi Zered, past the city of Kir in Moab, and continue north through Moab. So go ahead and pause the video here and mark the King's Highway as I have shown. Now, the next road is one we have already looked at on the Dead Sea map. It's the Zor Road, and it's going to come through the Beersheba Depression. It's going to circle around the shallow end of the Dead Sea. It's going to go through the city of Zor, and then it's going to climb up into the mountainous areas of Moab, and it's going to eventually meet with the King's Highway. Now, the next major route that we want to get is a route known as the Scorpion Ascent. And yes, if that sounds formidable and imposing, it's meant to be. It's not a really fun trek, but it is one of the major ways to get out of the Wadi Aravah. And so it starts at the city of Kalmona, and it's going to go up, 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 up until you get to the city of Safar. And it's going to go from Safar even further until you get into the Beersheba corridor, and eventually it's going to take you all the way to the land of the Philistines in the Philistine plain. Now, if you get to Kalmona and you keep going to the east, you'll be on a new road. This is what we call the Petra Road, and it's called that because it goes through Petra and eventually connects with the King's Highway. So go ahead and pause your lecture here and mark your map as we have shown. And our last road here, in case you're feeling really adventurous, you can go all the way the length of the Wadi Aravah, about 120 miles. It starts at Zor, and it goes all the way down to Kalmona, and it keeps going down through the valley floor until you get to Ezion Geber. And so that's going to be the quickest and the shortest distance to get from Zor all the way down to the coast of the Red Sea. Okay, so that's what our finished map looks like. You should have Dead Sea in the north, Zered River there going into that, and the Gulf of Aqaba in the south. And then you should have a lot of roads. You should have the King's Highway, the Aravah Road, the Petra Road, the Scorpion Ascent, and the Zor Road. And of course, you may want to go ahead and mark all your cities as we have here on this map as well. We got Arad just a little north of the Beersheba corridor. We have Kir just a little bit off the beaten path from the King's Highway. And then we have Zor, Safar, Kalmona, Petra, Hayumna, the city of Presidium, and Ezion Geber there at the bottom. Okay, so what are the take-home points for the Wadi Aravah that I'd like you to know? And I guess the first thing I think you need to know about the Wadi Aravah is that the area is divided into two parts. In the north, the area is very low and flat. It's many salt flats. It's basically kind of the overwash of the Dead Sea. And because of that, it has a wide open valley floor, and it's mostly salt and salt flats there at the bottom of it. Now, once you get to the south end, it's a lot more dramatic. It has more ups and downs, it's higher elevation, and it's what keeps the Gulf of Aqaba from just basically filling the entire Great Rift Valley, because the part of the Wadi Aravah is just high enough to keep the sea from flowing down into it. And so the south end, instead of having salt flats, it will have dried mud flats. And because of this, it's going to have very narrow canyon walls and will be oftentimes very imposing as you travel either side of that. Now, probably the most important take-home point about the Wadi Aravah is that the Aravah is a desolate desert. This whole area receives less than an inch of rain per year, simply because of the two factors that the south is drier, and second, because it lies right in the middle of a rain shadow. And so both of these things mean that this is going to be one of the driest and most inhospitable places on our maps that we'll be looking at. If someone's going to live here, well, let me put it this way, they probably can't. To make sustained human occupation possible, you're going to have someone who knows exactly where springs are. They're going to have to be able to travel back and forth. There just really isn't a good way to set up a city here and live here. And so any of the major cities in this area, like in the lower Jordan Valley, that they're not going to so much be settlements as they are going to be trading posts and toll roads, that they're there to control traffic and to prevent an invader from coming this way. But they're not going to be all that interested in making a living in a place like this. Now, before you go thinking that this is an area that is, just totally worthless, there is one reason to come to the Wadi Aravah, and that is it's very rich in mineral resources. You can mine metals like copper and zinc that can be found very close to the surface. And if you've got a lot of patience, granite can be mined deep on the Aravah floor. And so many strip mines will be in this area nowadays, and the reason they're going to do that is, who else is going to come into a desert and mine it for profit? Well, it takes all kinds. And so that's what I want you to know about the Wadi Aravah. Rich in mineral resources, but it's a desolate desert, and it's divided into two parts, low and flat in the north, higher and narrow in the south. Alright folks, well I think you all have had enough maps for the day, and so here's the part where you get to kind of stretch out a little bit and listen to me talk for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And for this particular lecture, we're going to hone in on Daniel chapter 5, and we're going to use that to give an example of what a final project could look like. And so in this section, we're going to focus specifically on the prophet Daniel. He is a Jewish exile living in the land of Babylon, and we know exactly when this time would have happened. It's around 539 BC, because this is going to be the moment when Cyrus the Great and all of his Persian and Mede allies come into the city of Babylon, and they will take it over. And so, of course, this is where our story will take place, in the city of Babylon. And in particular, I want to focus on this idea that power is not necessarily all that it's cracked up to be, especially when you look at it from a king's or a monarch's perspective. That frequently in our world, people try to accumulate power. They try to hoard power. But as Daniel chapter 5 shows, that power cannot save a person, especially when God has ordained that the person is to be made an example of. And so that's where we're going to begin, here in the city of Babylon, with Daniel in a not-so-great situation. And to explain just how not so great of a situation it is, we're going to actually utilize our map to demonstrate what Daniel would have had to went through earlier in his life, around 605 BC. You see, in 605, Nebuchadnezzar and his father, Nabopolassar, will fight the last great battle against the Assyrians. They will crush the Assyrians in a battle known as Carchemish. And in doing so, the Assyrians will be defeated. Their Egyptian allies will retreat far down back into Egypt. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to take full control of the Levant. And in doing so, he is going to take hostages from the city of Jerusalem. He's going to take the king out of Jerusalem, and he's going to place a puppet king on the throne. But he's also going to take Daniel and his friends. And they're going to be fairly young and impressionable at this time. So if you could picture this for a second, the trek from Jerusalem back to Babylon, because, you know, you've got that huge eastern desert in between, it's really about a 950-mile march, because you've got to go north along the Central Ridge route till you get to the International Coastal Highway. You're going to take that all the way to Damascus and then further north to Carchemish. And then you're going to curve around the Fertile Crescent. You're going to go to Haran. And then you're going to follow the Euphrates River all the way down until you get to Babylon. It's about 950 miles. Average travel time would be somewhere about 2 to 3 months, especially if you're taking a large group of people like Daniel would have been in. And mercifully, this is actually relatively flat terrain, especially when you get to Mesopotamia. But keep in mind that this is going to be an impressionable young man, and his friends, by the way, but they are going to be taken from their home, they're going to be held hostage, and they're going to live the rest of their lives in Babylon. And so I just want you to picture this for a second. What would you do if you were taken hostage? If you were suddenly taken out of your home and moved to a place in a different country where you didn't know the language, you didn't know the customs, and more importantly, they don't know your God. What would you do? How would you act? What would you do to let people know that your God was special, that your God was a force to be reckoned with, that even though their army had defeated your army, they hadn't defeated your God? Well, this is the condition that David will find himself in, and his lifelong solution to this predicament is interesting to say the least. Now, during the course of Daniel's time in Babylon, he is going to make a reputation for himself as a wise man. And specifically, he is going to make a reputation for himself as an interpreter of dreams. And one of the most important dreams he will interpret, we find in Daniel chapter 2. He's going to interpret Nebuchadnezzar the king's dream that he has of this giant statue, very tall. It has a head of gold, a torso and arms of silver. It's going to have a bottom portion of brass or bronze, and then it's going to have feet of iron with toes mixed with iron and clay. And the king and all of his other cronies don't know what to make of this at all. However, Daniel will come into this. He will not only interpret the dream, but he'll actually tell the king, here's the dream you dreamed, and now here's what it means. And Daniel's setup for its interpretation is interesting. He says this, quote, "As for you, O king, while you are on your bed, your thoughts turn towards future things. The revealer of mysteries has made known to you what will take place in the future. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has granted you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. Wherever human beings, wild animals, or birds live in the sky, he has given them into your power. He has given you authority over them all. You are the head of gold on this statue. Now, after you, another kingdom will rise, one that is inferior to yours." Unquote. So what we have there, Daniel is expressing to Nebuchadnezzar that one day his empire, great as it may be, powerful as it may be, is going to fall and it will crumble, and that a new empire, but one that is inferior, will come to take its place. Now, I personally find this to be a pretty gutsy statement, because the last thing any king wants to hear from one of his prophets or seers is that his kingdom is already numbered, that it only has so much time to exist. But that is exactly the promise that Daniel will give. Now, we're going to see the fulfillment of this within Daniel's lifetime. Come 539 BC, we're going to have a new king on the throne, and we're going to have the Persians knocking at the door. Now, the way that the book of Daniel is organized, we have a jump between Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is still reigning on the throne and powerful as ever. At least he is once he's restored back to his throne. But when we get to Daniel chapter 5, we are all of a sudden introduced to a new king, a king by the name of Belshazzar. And this is going to require us to do a little bit of digging, because the book of Daniel doesn't say how much time has passed in between Daniel 4, when we had Nebuchadnezzar on the throne, and Daniel 5, when we have Belshazzar on the throne. Now, lucky for us, the Babylonians kept many, many records, and many of those have survived to this day. And so, using the Babylonian chronology, we know pretty certainly exactly how this runs down. We have Nabopolassar back in 625 to 605. This was Nebuchadnezzar's dad. We have Nebuchadnezzar from 605 to 562 BC. And so sometime before 562 is when Daniel 4 is written. Now, after this, we have another king by the name of Evil-Merodach, who is going to reign just briefly from 562 to 560. Then we're going to have a usurper by the name of Niglazzar, who is going to reign from 560 to 555. So we're going to have two very short-lived reigns. And then we're going to have another usurper, and one who's going to have moderate success, by the name of Nabonidus. Now, you may have wondered, okay, so that's all well and good, but where's Belshazzar? Well, here's the rub. Nabonidus has a son by the name of Belshazzar. And so what we have is a idea known as co-regency. Very frequently, a king, when he is trying to groom one of his sons to take his place once he is gone, that he will allow his son to reign as king. By all intents and purposes, Belshazzar is ruling as king, but there's still someone above him, Nabonidus. And so this is going to bring up a very interesting issue that we'll see in Daniel 5. Nabonidus will be the official king and the highest king in the land, but Belshazzar, his son, is also technically king at the same time. Now, when we pick up the story from Daniel 5, it reads like this, quote, "King Belshazzar prepared a great banquet for thousands of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in front of them all. And while under the influence of wine, Belshazzar ordered them to bring in gold and silver vessels, the very ones that Nebuchadnezzar his father had confiscated from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, together with their wives and concubines, could drink from them. And so they brought the gold and silver vessels that had been confiscated from the temple in the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles sat together with their wives and concubines, and they drank from them." Unquote. And just to, add a little insult to injury here, it goes on further to say that while they're doing this, they will basically involve themselves in pagan revelry. They will praise gods of gold, silver, stone, and whatnot. And this raises an interesting question. Where is Nabonidus in this whole story? If the kingdom is about to fall to the Persians, where is Nabonidus? And the simple answer to that is Nabonidus considers himself to be a very spiritual person, and one of the things that Nabonidus does in the name of spirituality is he is going to be almost 100% devoted to a single Babylonian god, and this god is known as Sin. And again, this is not the kind of sin as in like, like to break one of the commandments. Sin is actually a proper name. And also, coincidentally, it's also one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But what we have here is Nabonidus worships this moon god by the name of Sin. And the primary place where this god is worshipped is a place called Tamah. And it's in the middle of the Arabian desert, about 500 miles away from Babylon. It's in the middle of nowhere. And so Nabonidus will very frequently just up and leave Babylon to go worship Sin at this shrine. And this will create an interesting problem. One, it will leave his son, Belshazzar, pretty much home alone to do whatever it is that Belshazzar feels like doing at the time. But it will also make the people very, very uncomfortable. And by the people, I mean the people of Babylon. You see, the Babylonians will have a ritual that happens every year where the king is supposed to get involved in this huge procession through the streets of Babylon. He is to go to the temple of Marduk, who is the primary god of Babylon, and he is to touch the hands of the Marduk idol. And this is basically to confirm that for yet another year, this person is king. Well, Nabonidus isn't all that big on worshiping Marduk. And so what's happened here is Nabonidus has literally fled town and neglected this sacred duty to touch Marduk's hands every year. And so the people of Babylon are actually kind of starting to wonder, is our king really even working anymore? Is our king doing what he's supposed to be doing? And in the middle of all this, we find Belshazzar answering that question for us. No, he's not. In fact, he's having a drinking party with all of his nobles right as the time that a competing army is gathering at the gates. Now, as this is going down, what we're going to find is that God is going to send Belshazzar a message very loud and clear. And the text says this, quote, "At that very moment, fingers of a human hand appeared." Apparently they're just kind of floating in the middle of nowhere there. And they wrote on the plaster of the palace wall opposite the lampstand, basically showing that everyone can see it. It's well lit by the lampstand. That's what it means to be opposite. And so as the king is watching the back of the hand that is writing, what's going to happen is he's going to start to tremble. He's going to start to shake. The Aramaic section of this text is actually pretty vulgar. It suggests that he is going to defecate on himself. He is going to basically lose control of his bowels. He is so frightened. And in doing all of this and in seeing all of this, he's going to immediately call for somebody to explain what this is. That this is obviously a very important sign. A hovering hand doesn't just start writing in the middle of nowhere every day. And so he's going to demand an explanation. So to get to the bottom of all of this, the king is going to summon three groups of people. He's going to summon his astrologers, his wise men, and his diviners. Now, all three of these are simply people groups that are basically using prophecy, and specifically a deductive form of prophecy that you would have seen described in your Walton textbook. That these are people who know how to read omens in the stars, that these are people who know how to read omens in liver, these are people that sometimes know how to even, mix and match some drugs to have visions. But the king is going to proclaim to these wise men, he's going to say, if anyone can read this, I'm going to give you three things. You will be clothed in purple, meaning that you will basically stand out as one of the elite rulers of this country. You will have a gold chain placed around your neck, again, something indicating power and status. And you will be made third ruler of the kingdom. And of course, this is an interesting little nod to the fact that he can't make them the second highest ruler in the kingdom, because Belshazzar already is the second highest ruler in the kingdom. His father, Nabonidus, is the highest ruler. And so the highest office he can give is the third highest ruler. But all three of these people using deductive prophecy can't read the writing. And I think that this is very intentional, as your Walton textbook points out, that Israel's prophecy is made to be very different. according to the book of Deuteronomy, there is a focus on the fact that we will not use things like astrologers. We will not use omens. We will not use necromancy or drugs in order to get our visions. Instead, we will simply ask for direct wisdom from God. And so, needless to say, because this is a story about how God's power trumps all of these other forms of power, none of these people will be able to read the writing or make the interpretation known. And so we have two basic problems. One, they can't read it. It may be in a language that they don't understand. It's hard to say. And the second is they can't try to interpret it either. So it's at this point that Nebuchadnezzar has developed a problem. That he has all this power. He can give, purple and scarlet clothing. He can give chains of gold. He can even make someone an important ruler. But do you know what he can't do? He can't read this writing. And the more they tell them, or the more that they tell Belshazzar that they can't read it, the more he becomes shaken. And so, what we find is that in the commotion that is being caused here, that the more he's getting terrified and the more that people are getting dumbfounded by this, that the queen comes in, or some translations call it the queen mother, indicating that it may be Belshazzar's mom, it may be his wife. It's not terribly certain here. But she will enter the banquet hall and she will say the standard Babylonian greeting, "O king, live forever." And then she'll go say, "Don't be alarmed and don't be shaken. There is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, he proved to have insight, discernment, and wisdom like that of the gods." Now, I find this to be an interesting statement because even with Daniel there, even with him showing just exactly who his God is for the last 4 chapters of his book, and people like Belshazzar's mom or wife having seen these things, she still doesn't get it. But she does understand that Daniel is powerful. And right now, the king needs something to put his mind at ease because his own power isn't enough. So, at this juncture, Belshazzar finally calls Daniel in, and when Daniel arrives, Belshazzar gives him the same speech he gave to all the other diviners and astrologers. He says, "Daniel, if you can read this writing, I will give you the gold chain, I'll give you the purple clothing, I'll make you the 3rd highest ruler." Now, Daniel apparently already knows what this thing says. He, in fact, seems to know everything that's happened, even though he wasn't present. But Daniel is going to say, "King, keep your gifts and give them to someone else. However, I will read the writing and make known for the king its interpretation." But before he does that, he then basically takes the king's sin on personally. He says, "But as for you, O king, the Most High God bestowed on your father, Nebuchadnezzar, a kingdom of greatness, honor, and majesty." Now, this is an interesting statement because Nebuchadnezzar, according to Babylonian records, is no blood relation to either Nabonidus or to Belshazzar. So it's interesting to ask the question, how is Nebuchadnezzar the father? It may simply be just a statement that whoever the king is of the land, he is father of the entire land, i.e. that there's just an assessment that the king is father to everybody, that it's, a customary way to do that. Or it may be a somewhat of a jest because Nabonidus is not related to Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody knows it, but Nabonidus may have been trying to hide this fact to basically legitimate his reign. And basically, David's calling him out on that by using the term. But he reminds Belshazzar that there is a story back when Nebuchadnezzar was ruler. It says, "When his mind became arrogant and he was filled with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and his honor was removed from him. He was driven from human society and his mind was changed to that of an animal." Daniel was reminding Belshazzar that for as great as Nebuchadnezzar was, his power couldn't save him. And this is going to be an interesting parallel because here we have Belshazzar on the eve of the destruction of the Babylonian Empire, and for all his power, he won't be able to save himself either. So at this point, Daniel begins his interpretation of the 4 words on the wall, and he says that the words are many, tekel, parsin. And I just got to say, as someone who has studied Hebrew and Aramaic, this is a rather frustrating statement because all of these are very common words. In fact, they're all standard weights and measures. Now, I could also say that because they're weights and measures and gold and silver are measured by these things, that these could also be units of money. But these words by themselves don't make a lot of sense. And what Daniel seems to be doing is following the rules of apocalyptic literature. This is a message for God's people, people who are on the inside who know what these terms mean in a spiritualized sense. People on the outside would just simply hear, oh, that's a list of weights and measures. Now, there's 2 ways that this could be translated if you were doing this literally. The first is that he is using weights and measures, and so literally, mini, tekel, parsin would be translated as pound, half ounce, half pound. Now, if it's units of money, it may be easier to say something like $50, $1, $25. Either way, it's cryptic. And so what's going on here? Why did this hand appear out of nowhere and write 4 words that, quite frankly, taken by themselves, mean nothing? Well, the simple answer is wordplay. So what is Daniel going to be getting at here? Well, the easiest way to demonstrate this is to let you hear this for yourself. Here's how these words sound in Aramaic. Minna, minna. Okay, hear the difference? Minna, minna. Okay, the second word, tekel, and then it's parallel, tekelita. Tekel, tekelita. And then the third one, fars, and then it's parallel, farsat. And so what's actually going on here is Daniel is going to make an Aramaic language wordplay. And he is going to specifically use the words that are written on the wall, and he is going to deviate into what are known as homonyms, words that sound similar but have different meanings. And so when he says you have a menne, but God is going to bring about the numbering of your days, that he's going to basically use this other word, menna, which means to number. Daniel is going to continue that same frame of reference. The word for shekel, tekel, he's going to say that tekelita is a word meaning to weigh, to balance. And so he's going to say, you've been measured in the scales and you've been found wanting. And then he's going to say, fares. And then he's going to match that with this other word, he's going to match that with this other word, fersat, which is basically a verb meaning to break. And he says, your kingdom is going to be broken into pieces and given to the Medes and the Persians. And so this is one of those reasons why I can't stress this strongly enough. One of these days, you're really going to want to study the original languages for yourself. In English, you simply won't catch these kind of word plays. And in reading the Hebrew Bible, you will find that these word plays are everywhere, and they're extremely common. And so one of the things that I can encourage you here, that it is always worth the time and effort to translate from the original languages to get more out of your exegetical work when you read the Bible. So this is how our text of Daniel ends. Daniel has successfully interpreted the words. Belshazzar gives him all of the gold chains and purple clothing that he has promised, and just like that, it's over. Cyrus comes into town. He destroys the Babylonian monarchy, He makes all of the Babylonians happy by participating in the Marduk ceremony. And all of a sudden, there's a new sheriff in town. Cyrus is now in charge. He will use that power to free the Israelites from their captivity, and they will come back to Judah in droves. But notice what has happened there. We have lost a very powerful king. And why? Because he is arrogant. Because he has not humbled himself, and because he should have known better. And likewise, King Cyrus will do some pretty important things. He will be one of the better kings in Israelite history, at least according to their recollection. But as the monuments attest, even Cyrus will pass away. For as great as he was, his tomb is with us, and he has died. And the same could be said with any leader throughout history. Alexander the Great, any of the Caesars, George Washington, any of our presidents, that no matter how powerful a person becomes, that they will eventually die. And this is one of those moments where we see the scandal of the gospel come full circle here. That 1 Peter 5:5 says that God explicitly opposes those who are proud. And we find in Luke chapter 12 that Jesus specifically says that a person's riches and their wealth cannot save them, especially on the day of death and judgment. What good are such things? And, in contrast, Paul writes in Philippians when he gives the eloquent poem about Jesus and his death and crucifixion, he begins that whole passage in Philippians 2 where he says, "Let your mind be the same as the mind that was in Christ." That even though he was in very nature God, he did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped. He made himself nothing, taking on the nature of a servant, putting on human likeness, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient, even to death, even a death on the cross. And that whole statement is bolstered by this idea of your attitude should be the same as what was in Jesus. And so this is the scandal of the gospel. It makes no room or reservation for the proud. Only those who are humble, and those who are willing to humble themselves to the extreme, find themselves as true followers of Jesus. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba! Hey folks, this bibliography was brought to you by Bill T. Arnold and Brian E. Byer, Encountering the Old Testament. It was also brought to you by John E. Goldingay, the Word Biblical Commentary series with the Book of Daniel. It's also brought to you by Alfred J. Howarth, Gerald Madeline, and Edmund Yamamuchi in Peoples of the Old Testament. Word Study was brought to you by William A. Van Gimmeren and the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. More commentary on the nature of prophetism was brought to you by Leon J. Wood and the Prophets of Israel. And the Persia Historical Timeline is brought to you by Edwin Yamamuchi and Persia and the Bible. Thanks a lot, folks. It's been real. We'll catch you next week.